Nathan Caldwell was the man everyone admired, a shrewd CEO with an uncanny ability to turn failing businesses into flourishing empires. But behind the polished suits and unshakable demeanor was a man deeply scarred by the past. Years ago, Nathan's childhood had been a picture of perfection: loving parents, warm family dinners, and laughter that filled their modest home. But all of it crumbled the day Linda Turner entered their lives. Linda, with her beauty and charm, ensnared Nathan's father in an affair that tore their family apart. Nathan's mother, Margaret Caldwell, was left shattered. Once a lively, compassionate woman, she became a shadow of herself, succumbing to despair and isolation. Nathan would often sit by her bedside, watching helplessly as the light in her eyes dimmed. The nights spent holding her hand as she cried became seared into his memory, each tear a reminder of the pain Linda had caused. When Margaret passed away, Nathan vowed never to forget the woman who destroyed his family. Linda Turner had taken everything from him, and his only solace lay in the thought of revenge. For years, Nathan tracked her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But fate, as it often does, had a cruel twist in store. Instead of Linda, Nathan discovered her daughter, Sophie Turner. A woman so different from her mother, Sophie's kindness and humility stood in stark contrast to Linda's cunning ambition. And yet, for Nathan, she became the perfect target. If Linda had taken his family, he would do the same to hers. This was how Nathan's dark plan began to take shape. A plan that would pull Sophie into his world, only to shatter it beyond repair. Nathan Caldwell had been planning his revenge for years, but fate decided to present him with a different opportunity. Instead of Linda Turner, he discovered her daughter, Sophie Turner, a woman entirely unlike her calculating mother. Sophie led a simple yet resilient life. A diligent office worker, she spent her days juggling long hours at work and nights tending to her ailing mother. She had grown up in modest circumstances, never knowing wealth or luxury, but she took pride in her upbringing. To Sophie, her mother was a hero, a woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her with dignity and love. What Sophie didn't know was that the mother she cherished so deeply was the reason Nathan's family was destroyed. And now, Nathan's gaze had shifted toward her, marking her as the target of his meticulously crafted plan. Nathan quickly realized that Sophie was nothing like Linda. She was genuine, kind, and untainted by deceit. Yet, that didn't deter him. If he couldn't punish Linda directly, he would ensure her daughter bore the weight of all the pain he and his mother had endured. From a distance, Nathan watched Sophie with a calculated gaze, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to set his plan in motion. He vowed to trap her in his carefully laid web, pulling her into his life only to crush her completely. In Nathan's mind, revenge wasn't just a game. It was the only way to fill the void that had consumed his heart for so long. Nathan Caldwell began his pursuit of Sophie Turner with calculated charm and unwavering patience. He portrayed himself as the perfect gentleman, warm, attentive, and thoughtful. Small gifts, lavish dinners at upscale restaurants, and gentle words of encouragement gradually built Sophie's trust. Sophie, who had spent her life buried under work and the weight of caring for her sick mother, had never experienced this kind of attention before. Nathan became a beacon of light in her otherwise overwhelming and exhausting life. He made her believe she was special, the only woman who could enter his world. When Nathan proposed to Sophie in an upscale restaurant under the glow of glittering lights, she could hardly believe it. The sparkling diamond ring and his promise to help with her mother's medical expenses struck a chord in her heart. Sophie thought about the mounting medical bills, the sleepless nights by her mother's bedside, and the fear of losing the one person she loved most. Despite a small voice of doubt whispering in her heart, she accepted Nathan's proposal, seeing it as the only lifeline for her mother and herself. What Sophie didn't know was that everything Nathan had done was part of his ruthless revenge plan. For Nathan, this was the first move in his cold, calculated game of vengeance. For Sophie, it felt like the last fragile glimmer of hope in her difficult life. The wedding day of Sophie Turner and Nathan Caldwell was a dazzling affair, filled with extravagant grandeur. The massive ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, white flowers lined the aisle, and hundreds of elite guests gathered to witness the moment. Dressed in a magnificent gown, Sophie stood before a gilded mirror in a lavish room. Yet, instead of feeling joy, she felt hollow. Ever since accepting Nathan's proposal, everything had moved far too quickly. From dress fittings to venue selections and guest lists, every decision had been made by Nathan. Sophie felt like a doll, positioned exactly where others wanted her, with no control over her own life. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, one that didn't belong to Sophie. As she walked down the aisle, all eyes were on her, but an unbearable coldness gripped her heart. Nathan stood at the altar, impeccably dressed in a black suit, his handsome face devoid of any warmth or emotion. When the officiant asked, "Nathan Caldwell, do you take Sophie Turner to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Nathan's deep, chilling voice echoed through the room. "I do." Sophie's voice trembled as she repeated her vows. Cheers erupted, applause filled the air, but Sophie felt like she was stepping into a golden cage with no way out. That night, the wedding suite was as luxurious as the ceremony, a room filled with opulence but devoid of warmth. Nathan entered, his icy gaze locking onto Sophie. She shivered under his piercing stare, feeling the weight of something far darker than she had anticipated. Without a word, Nathan stepped closer, each movement deliberate, like a storm brewing within him. He grabbed Sophie, his touch rough and unkind. There was no tenderness, no affection, only possession. Nathan's actions were raw, fueled by years of suppressed rage and resentment. He treated Sophie as though she were the embodiment of every wound her mother had inflicted on his family. His kiss was sharp, cutting through her like a blade, devoid of love or care. Sophie's tears streamed silently down her cheeks, but she didn't fight back. She endured, unable to comprehend how the man who had once seemed so kind could now be so cruel. When it was over, Nathan turned his back and left her lying motionless on the bed, her heart shattered. The wedding night wasn't the beginning of a new life. It was the start of a nightmare Sophie had never imagined. The wedding night left Nathan Caldwell with an unsettling emptiness. He had followed through on his plan, pouring out all his anger and resentment onto Sophie Turner, the woman he had chosen to bear the weight of Linda Turner's sins. Yet, as he lay alone on the large bed in his room, he couldn't escape the image of Sophie's tear-streaked face and her quiet resignation. Sophie hadn't fought back. She didn't scream or accuse him. Instead, she remained silent, her sorrowful gaze reflecting every ounce of pain Nathan had endured in his own past. That look unsettled him in a way he hadn't anticipated. In the days that followed, Nathan began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. Sophie, despite his cold indifference and cruelty, continued to live her life with quiet resilience. She went to work diligently each day and returned home to care for her mother in their modest apartment. Her unwavering kindness and selflessness began to shake Nathan's resolve. No longer did he see her as the enemy, the scapegoat for his pain. Instead, he saw a woman who embodied strength and grace, a woman undeserving of his cruelty. One evening, after a long day at work, Nathan happened to see Sophie leaving the office. Her frail figure, weighed down by exhaustion, moved quietly through the bustling streets. The sight left a strange ache in his chest. For the first time, he questioned whether his revenge had been aimed at the right person, or if he was simply punishing an innocent soul to ease his own anguish. The satisfaction Nathan had once imagined his revenge would bring was gone. Instead, guilt gnawed at him every time he saw Sophie silently enduring the burdens of her life. A part of him longed to protect her, to shield her from further pain. But how could he protect someone he had deliberately hurt so deeply? One evening after work, Sophie Turner returned to her modest apartment. Exhausted from another long day juggling her job and caring for her sick mother, she reminded herself that all her efforts were worth it if they could give her mother a bit more time. Nathan's frequent absences from their life were both a relief and a source of unease she couldn't quite understand. That evening, however, Nathan had unexpectedly been home earlier. He had left behind a file on his desk, the briefcase carelessly left unlocked as he rushed out for a phone call. Sophie didn't think much of it, but when her eyes caught her own name boldly printed on the file's cover, an inexplicable sense of dread crept into her heart. With trembling hands, she opened the file. The bold heading on the first page cut through her like a blade. Objective: destroy Sophie Turner to make her mother suffer the same pain. Sophie froze, her eyes glued to the words that felt like a dagger plunging into her chest. As she flipped through the pages, every carefully outlined step of Nathan's plan unfolded before her eyes. His calculated approach, his effort to win her trust, and the eventual entrapment in a marriage she had believed was built on love. All of it meticulously detailed. But the most devastating blow came from another document tucked at the bottom of the file, a separate report on her mother, Linda Turner. The report laid bare the truth about Linda's affair with Nathan's father, which had torn apart his family and led to his mother's tragic death. Sophie's heart shattered as she realized the mother she had always idolized, the woman she believed to be selfless and loving, was the root cause of all the pain Nathan had endured. The sound of the door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Nathan entered the room, his gaze immediately landing on Sophie. Her tear-streaked face and trembling hands clutching the file told him everything he needed to know. "Sophie, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with unease. She turned to face him, her eyes burning with both anguish and fury. "It was all a lie, wasn't it?" she demanded, her voice trembling with heartbreak. Nathan couldn't deny it. This was the moment he had always known would come, but he hadn't anticipated how deeply it would cut. Sophie shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "I trusted you. I thought you were someone I could rely on." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of betrayal heavy in her words. "I can't stay here, not for another second." That night, Sophie packed her belongings and left. What Nathan didn't know, however, was that she carried a secret. Sophie had recently discovered she was pregnant. Nathan Caldwell stood frozen in the emptiness of the room, the space that Sophie Turner had once filled now eerily silent. The last of her belongings had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a void he hadn't anticipated. He had driven her away, and now, with the oppressive stillness around him, the weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders. Nathan had once believed that revenge would bring him peace, but now all he felt was emptiness and guilt. The image of Sophie's tear-streaked face, her heart breaking as she clutched the file revealing his cruel plan, haunted him endlessly. One morning, as Nathan sat silently in his office, his assistant Mark entered, carrying a folder with a cautious expression. "Mr. Caldwell, there's something I think you need to see." Nathan took the folder and opened it. His heart stopped at the sight. Inside was an ultrasound image, clearly marked with Sophie Turner's name. 2 tiny figures were visible on the scan. "She's pregnant," Mark added gently, "and they're your children." Nathan's grip on the folder tightened as a wave of emotion swept over him. Joy, fear, and an overwhelming sense of regret. Sophie was pregnant and she had left him, taking not just her broken dreams, but also the family he hadn't realized he longed for. Without hesitation, Nathan began searching for Sophie. He hired investigators to track her down, but she had cut ties with everyone and disappeared completely. At last, he found her in a small seaside village. When he arrived, the sight before him left him speechless. Sophie stood on the porch of a modest home, her pregnant belly unmistakable. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach, a gesture that struck Nathan deeply. "Sophie!" Nathan called out, his voice low but laced with desperation. She turned, her eyes cold and guarded. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone steady but distant. Nathan took slow steps toward her, his gaze filled with remorse. "I know, Sophie. You're pregnant, and they're my children." Sophie clenched her hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They're not yours, Nathan. I don't need you, and neither do they," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. Her words cut Nathan to the core, but he refused to give up. "I was wrong, Sophie. I hurt you, but I can't abandon you or them. I want to make things right." Sophie's gaze burned with pain and conflict. "Make things right?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "Do you think a few words can undo everything you've done? You destroyed me, Nathan. I will never trust you again." Nathan dropped to his knees before her, his voice trembling with sincerity. Please, Sophie, give me a chance. I don't deserve it, I know, but for our children I'll do anything. I swear. Sophie stared at him, her emotions warring within her. She turned away without a word, retreating into the house, leaving Nathan standing alone in the cold sea breeze. Sophie Turner didn't answer Nathan Caldwell that day, but his presence in the small seaside village lingered in her mind. She knew Nathan was a determined man, or perhaps just stubborn. Either way, forgiveness wasn't something she could give so easily. Nathan didn't leave the village. Instead of forcing Sophie to accept him, he chose a different approach. He began to care for her silently, persistently, and from a distance. When strong sea winds damaged the roof of her modest house, Nathan hired someone to fix it. The hospital bills that had always weighed heavily on Sophie's mind suddenly disappeared, paid without her knowledge. Even at her workplace, a small office in the village, Nathan ensured she had a supportive environment where no one could trouble her. Each morning, Nathan parked his car discreetly at the end of the quiet street where Sophie lived, watching from afar to make sure she was safe. He never approached her directly, but his gaze followed her every step, filled with a love he no longer tried to deny. One evening, as Sophie returned home, her steps faltered under the weight of exhaustion. Nathan watched from a distance, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Every fiber of his being wanted to rush to her side to help her, but he held back. He knew he hadn't earned that right yet. Sophie gradually began to notice the changes around her, the quiet assistance, the repairs, the unspoken concern in Nathan's occasional glances. Her heart, still wounded, began to waver ever so slightly. The turning point came on a stormy night. Sophie was alone at home when sudden, sharp pains racked her body. She clutched the edge of the table, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she struggled to stay upright. In her moment of desperation, Sophie made a call to the one person she knew would answer without hesitation. Within minutes, Nathan burst through the door, his face pale with fear. He found Sophie on the floor, clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her ashen face. "Sophie!" he cried, dropping to his knees beside her. Without wasting a second, Nathan scooped her into his arms and carried her to his car. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel, and he kept glancing at her in the passenger seat, his voice breaking as he reassured her. "You'll be okay, I promise." That stormy night didn't just awaken Nathan's fear of losing Sophie. It also stirred something in Sophie. Despite his mistakes, one truth became undeniable. Nathan was always there when she needed him most. Sophie Turner woke up to the soft glow of the hospital room. The pain had subsided, and as she turned her head, her eyes met Nathan Caldwell's. He was sitting there, his head bowed low, his hands gripping hers tightly as if afraid she would disappear if he let go. "You're still here?" Her voice came out soft, laced with fatigue and surprise. Nathan lifted his head, his eyes filled with remorse and love. "I promised. I'm not going anywhere. Not from you, not from our children." It was then that Sophie noticed the two small cribs beside her bed. Inside, two baby girls slept peacefully. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch one of them, her fingers grazing the baby's soft, warm skin. Tears fell from her eyes, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming joy. Nathan watched her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for bringing them into this world. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'll do everything to show you that I truly love you." In the days that followed, Nathan didn't just speak his intentions. He lived them. He became a devoted father, staying up through the night to care for the twins, doing every small task so Sophie could rest. He learned to cook, to change diapers, and to soothe the baby's cries. Even when Sophie kept her distance, Nathan remained patient, proving his love day by day. One afternoon, as Sophie held the twins in her arms, she watched Nathan fixing the roof of their porch. The sunlight cast a warm glow over his face, slick with sweat. For the first time in months, Sophie smiled. "You've been working hard," she said, her voice teasing. Nathan paused, turning to look at her. His eyes lit up as if her simple words had breathed life back into him. As time passed, Sophie slowly began to let down her walls. One evening, as Nathan rocked the twins to sleep, Sophie walked over to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We can try again," she said softly, her voice gentle like a breeze. Nathan looked up, his eyes brimming with emotion. He stood, gazing into Sophie's eyes, and pulled her into a warm embrace. "I won't let you down again, I promise." With love and patience, they rebuilt what was broken. Sophie and Nathan were no longer two people bound by pain, but a family bound by trust, forgiveness, and genuine love. On a golden afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Sophie watched Nathan holding their two daughters. Her heart swelled with gratitude, and for the first time in so long, she believed in happiness again.